I used to warn people about Buffy Season 1. I'd call it a slog, a rough start, something you have to suffer through to get to the true brilliance of the show. And to be fair, that is often the case with classic TV. A long-running show will, if it's lucky, be known for its highs and not for its lows, but things do often start out low as a show figures itself out. Sure, you might have a fantastic script, but you won't really know what a show is until the rubber meets the road. The iconic comedy duo of Community, after all, was supposed to be Troy and Pierce, and it was only halfway through season 1 that they figured out the incredible chemistry of Troy and Abed and started writing that into the show instead.
Troy and Abed in the morning!
Screenplays are more like, no, okay. Okay, it's belly times. It's belly time, sorry guys. Screenplays are less like novels and more like blueprints, and at the start, you haven't built anything yet, so the first season of a show is often written blind in a way that later seasons simply are not. So, just as you might see big changes comparing a pilot to episode 2, a first season can act as a pilot for the rest of the series, a starting point to be improved upon. And there are, of course, many ways that Buffy Season 1 might have been improved upon, including special effects and fight choreography, factors that couldn't yet match the high ambition of the script. Even the most die-hard Buffy fan will admit that compared to later seasons, Buffy Season 1 is different. My past self would have said inferior, and I've even seen people recommend which episodes to skip to get to the good seasons, something that may well have seemed reasonable to my past self. However, I'm making this video because on my most recent rewatch, I've had an epiphany, and it is this. My past self was an idiot. Buffy Season 1 is just as good as later seasons, and I've got the proof right here. Welcome to my TED Talk, baby! From the very first shot, we're introduced to a Sunnydale High wreathed in shadows, with a camera that meanders through the halls in the point of view tradition of 80s horror flicks. Welcome to the cold open, the bit before the intro, the part where someone is usually murdered. That's the main function, teasing a mystery to catch your interest, but a great cold open should also be thematically relevant. Screenwriting 101 will tell you that the first scene should work as a microcosm of the whole story, just as the first page of a novel gives you a good idea of what to expect. And the first scene in Buffy does just that, as we're introduced to Darla, a seeming victim who turns out to be the monster. And this tells us exactly what to expect, not just from the episode, but from the whole show. We're going postmodern, so please take all your expectations and throw them out the window. The show started with the idea to invert the trope of the little blonde girl who goes into a dark alley and gets killed in every horror movie. In Buffy, that girl is the hunter, or the slayer, and this is only the first in a cavalcade of tropes we'll be playing around with.
Look, I really don't want to fight all three of you, unless I have to.
This show is probably the reason you even know what a trope is, as tvtropes.org was created specifically to keep track of how Buffy played with genre conventions, after which the website branched out and became a repository that covers all known media from Gilmore Girls to Gilgamesh. There's a reason why TV writers and media academic nerds tend to love Buffy. There's just a surprising amount to unpack. But none of that depth would matter if the surface level was boring, and Buffy is anything but. A lot of writers would do well to remember that just throwing a bunch of tropes together does not automatically create a story. And the basic conceit of, what if that blonde girl was actually the hunter, that's not a story. It's a twist, but not a foundation that you can create episode after episode from. For that, you need a springboard, a mechanism by which you can launch 1,000 plots. And in Buffy, that mechanism is, what if the Slayer had to fight a different monster every week? Now you have an external plot, but that's still not a story because there's nothing internal happening there, no growth or change in character. For that, we need to get to the foundational mythic core upon which all of Buffy is built, which Buffy's mother helpfully lays out in the 2-part pilot.
This is really, really important.
I know. If you don't go out, it'll be the end of the world. Everything is life or death when you're a 16-year-old girl.
That right there is the thesis, because each monster that Buffy fights serves as a heightened version of some real-life relatable problem that teenagers go through. That's what all good fantasy does. Monsters are always stand-ins for real-life problems, whether that's Godzilla representing our fear of nuclear fallout, or witches representing our fear of, you know, women. If a hero fights a monster without a real-life anxiety attached to it, that's just a pointless action sequence, but when a hero can punch a monster and at the same time punch the concept of bullying, well, hot damn, that's what storytelling's all about. For example, in the third episode, The Witch, Buffy perceives her mother as overbearing, attempting to take over her life.
This just in. I'm not you. I'm into my own thing.
Turns out there's another girl, Amy, whose mother is literally taking over her life, having Freaky Friday'd the two of them with dark magic so that she can relive her glory days.
She switched your bodies, didn't she?
Good Lord.
And she's not afraid to set fire to a few cheerleaders to get there. Thus, the natural, everyday problem that Buffy is dealing with has been elevated into the supernatural, allowing her to physically fight and defeat it, and bringing us neatly to a reconciliation with her mother at the end, as Buffy has learned something through this experience. Now that's a story. Bullying is tackled in the 6th episode, The Pack, where the idea of teens acting despicably due to pack mentality is elevated into the supernatural when Xander is inflicted with a hyena spirit.
It's devastating. He's turned into a 16-year-old boy. Of course, you'll have to kill him.
And in Out of Sight, Out of Mind, a perpetually ignored girl feels invisible to her peers, and the demonic radiation of the Hellmouth under the school causes her to become actually invisible, which drives her to take revenge on those who ignored her. Of course, in that episode, Buffy herself is dealing with feelings of alienation, since her role as the Slayer has caused her to plummet from the top of the social hierarchy to the bottom. In this and many other episodes, Buffy is able to defeat her monsters only by understanding them. Her real-life problems let her identify with her opponents, which allows her to change and grow once she understands the psychological impulse of that monster and either kicks its ass or rehabilitates it. Often both.
I see you.
Look, I know I'm not breaking any new ground here. You probably knew that Buffy fights teenage problems made manifest, and even if you didn't, you could grasp it by watching pretty much any episode. That deeper meaning might not always seem so deep when some of the monsters are pretty on the nose, but this central aspect still infuses the show with a mythic quality. Myths are our way of making sense of the world, and through the show we follow Buffy as she makes sense of everyday problems by punching them in the face. The fact that these are relatable problems we all have to face when growing up is what makes it such a resonant show. And because good writing makes us identify with the protagonist, that's actually us there on that screen, punching our problems and growing and changing all from the comfort of our own living rooms. The coupling of the monster stuff and the teen stuff allows this show to create something new, where each elevates the other. We get the best of both worlds as the sun-drenched Sunnydale High stands in contrast to the world of shadows in which the teenage subconscious goes into battles far greater than what can be seen on the surface. Teen dramas and creature features both have a plethora of conventions to pull from, and in Buffy Season 1, these two genres come crashing together in such a spectacular fashion that they fuse, creating something entirely new. It might not seem revolutionary now, but the list of shows, movies, comics, and other creative works that wouldn't exist at all without Buffy's first season is incredibly long. And, of course, that list starts with Buffy Seasons 2 to 7. Because despite all of its faults, which we'll get into, Buffy Season 1 lays an extremely solid foundation.
Eat it.
Oh, I had a big breakfast. I'll just wait for...
Later seasons would go on to complicate the relationship between the natural and the supernatural world in ways that brought more depth to the storytelling, but none of that would have been possible without a solid foundation to stand on. You cannot start out with complexity, which, again, is something that modern TV writers need to remember. If Buffy and The Sopranos are big influences on TV writing, another huge influence is the mystery box of Lost. The J.J. Abrams method of hyping up some some big question and then, quite often, failing to deliver a satisfying answer. Back in the early 2000s, we were fatigued with shows resetting their status quo at the end of each episode. We longed for longer form storytelling, and our culture has been enriched by great writers pulling that off to perfection, but we've also seen how a longer runtime can get squandered. How often have you watched a Netflix show with a plot that probably would have worked well as a feature film, but instead they stretched it into a dozen episodes? The business priorities behind TV production have shifted. It's now less important to lure viewers back after commercial breaks and more important to produce an endless stream of content for people to leave on while they're on their phones. Netflix is sending scripts back to writers with requests that the characters announce what they're doing so that viewers who leave the show on in the background can follow along. They're literally asking writers to tell, not show, because they don't expect people to pay attention. And you might say, well, Jacob, bad shows have always existed. You just need to seek out shows that are made for smart people who like to pay attention.
Our bodies are in David's childhood bedroom, probably frozen in time. And if I remember it right, someone just fired a machine gun. What we have to do is distract the monster, who looks like Lenny but isn't, so we can save our bodies without her knowing, and then find a way to end the hospital fantasy and save David.
Yes, wow.
I've been paying attention.
But guess what? Most of these smart shows people tell me to watch shy away from honest, old-fashioned storytelling and instead rely on unanswered questions and endless flashback episodes in hopes of luring people back with some great mystery. Remember Westworld? I'm proud to say that I saw where that shit was going from the very start. Absolutely nowhere. But that's not what Buffy is. Compared to your average Netflix show, the amount of plot packed into each episode should be overwhelming, but it's not. And on top of that, it gets the balance between episodic and long-form storytelling just right, in a way that completely revolutionized writing for television. Sure, later seasons would take that further. They also had more episodes to play with, but I'm shocked at the confidence with which Buffy the Vampire Slayer explodes onto the screen in its first season. They got so many things right from the very start, like the charm, comedy, and genuine emotion that Sarah Michelle Gellar brings to the character from the get-go.
Read me the signs! Tell me my fortune! You're so useful sitting here with all of your books! You're really a lot of help!
I don't suppose I am.
Screw it, ditto that for the whole ensemble cast with Giles' sincerity, Willow's awkwardness hiding steel underneath, and Xander's... Let's not talk about Xander. So much of what you like about Buffy the Vampire Slayer was there from the get-go. When Giles and Buffy clash in the very first episode, it's funny, but there's a hint of something more. There's already a sense that she needs him to navigate this, and that she doesn't have a choice because she's linked to this world of darkness, much as she would prefer to walk in the light.
The signs could be wrong. It's not as though you've been having the nightmares.
Of course, there's one counter-argument you could make. You could say all of this myth nonsense is well and good, but the show still looks terrible. It's full of rubbery monster masks, subpar fight scenes, and production shortcomings they've tried to hide with editing. The good stuff is good, Jacob, but there's also a lot of bad stuff. More bad stuff than in later seasons, so how can you say it's just as good? To answer that question, I need to tell you about another institution built atop the gates of hell. Darkplace Hospital.
You are entering my dark place.
Garth Marenghi's Darkplace is an 80s low-budget Monster of the Week horror show created by and starring author, dreamweaver, and visionary Garth Marenghi. Or is it? No, it isn't. Garth Marenghi's Darkplace is actually a parody of cheesy 80s horror and action shows created by Richard Ayoade and Matthew Holness. It's a different take on the mockumentary format brought to prominence by The Office in 1999. Matthew Holness plays horror author Garth Marenghi, a self-obsessed and delusional parody version of Stephen King, who, in the universe of the show, made a terrible TV show in the 1980s that never saw the light of day. Then, in 2004, they finally broadcast the show, interwoven with present-day interviews with the cast and crew, discussing what absolute visionaries they were back in the day, which is juxtaposed with the wonderfully terrible show that they made.
I've stood in Dean's front room and watched him make a lot of love.
Let's just say that.
What makes Garth Marenghi shine is the attention to detail. Every aspect of the show lives and breathes. This was shot in somebody's garage. The intentionally bad sets, continuity errors, editing to cover up bad acting, and subpar special effects all make this a pitch-perfect send-up of cheesy old TV shows.
I see the past, the present, and the future.
Tough gig.
Stop being sarcastic.
Maybe if everyone who'd ever been close to you had died, you'd be sarcastic too.
Yes, that makes sense.
Garth Marenghi plays Dr. Rick Douglas, a former warlock who opened a portal to hell under his hospital and who is now fighting back the demons and occult occurrences he's unleashed, together with a ragtag group of hospital employees.
You two, this is a hospital!
Oh, and it's also kind of a buddy cop show with the hospital administrator acting as the disgruntled captain. Richard Ayoade brilliantly plays this character as if he has no acting ability at all, nervously rattling off every line while trying not to look at the camera.
Bye. Good gravy. A small bunch of objects are flying of their own accord in E-Wing.
All of that is funny, but really, it's all surface level stuff that should get old quickly. What keeps you interested is that in the same way that Buffy heightens real-world teen problems into the supernatural, every episode of Garth Marenghi offers some new insight into the warped mind of Garth himself. For example, he elevates his racism against Scottish people into the supernatural in the Scotch Mist.
But why would long-dead Scottish warriors trapped in the mist come so far south?
To kill the Queen. And then destroy our way of life. That's what every Scotchman wants.
And in Hell Hath No Fury, Garth elevates the real-world nightmare of a woman you know being on her period by turning Dr. Liz into a psychotic psychic who can make your head explode with a scream.
Thanks, Rick. I was hysterical.
Throughout it all, Garth writes himself to be the coolest dude ever. Every episode ends with him standing atop Darkplace Hospital, gazing into the distance and brooding on a Boreanaz level while inner monologuing about what he's learned today.
I'd have to try and change. Tomorrow I'd tell her she'd lost weight, or that her hair looked nice, whichever seemed more plausible.
At its core, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace, you're gonna fall off the couch. You have no self-preservation instinct at all. At its core, Garth Marenghi's Darkplace is a character study of a delusional egomaniac packaged as a parody.
As a horror writer, I don't ask for much. I just hope I've changed the way you think about life.
But why am I telling you all this? Because watching Garth Marenghi fills me with an unbridled joy. The cheesiness, the jank, the barely held together narratives, I find them all incredibly charming. It's clear that the creators have a deep familiarity with and love for the cheesy and bad media that they're making fun of. I have that love as well, because this particular flavor of bad is often the result of humans being profoundly creative and way more ambitious than what they're actually able to pull off. It has the same charm as the action movie my older brother shot when he was like 14 years old, which when I saw it was a big part of me going, wait a minute, you can make movies? And Buffy Season 1 fills you with the same energy and purpose. It makes you go, wait, you can tell stories like this? Usually something made to be intentionally bad, like Garth Marenghi, can never be as satisfying as the genuine article. And guess what? Buffy Season 1 is the genuine article. The biggest and most understandable criticism you could make of Season 1 is that the production quality isn't quite there yet, and as a result, the show is simply too cheesy. But I'm here to tell you, the cheese has matured. One of my favourite episodes of Buffy is one that often appears when people list their worst episodes. Namely Season 1, Episode 8, I, Robot, You, Jane. The concept is absolutely bonkers and could pretty much be an episode of Garth Marenghi. It starts with a demon getting trapped in a book in the 1400s, then we get this fantastic transition.
Oh, great. A book.
The book has wound up in Giles's collection, which is being scanned and digitized as a project run by computer teacher Jenny Callender. This means that the usually deserted library is invaded by a brigade of nerd students hopped up on cyberspace hype, much to Giles's horror.
The printed page is obsolete. Information isn't bound up anymore. It's an entity. The only reality is virtual. If you're not jacked in, you're not alive.
I want a tattoo of that whole speech. If you're not jacked in goes here, you're not alive, right there. Willow scans the book, which releases the trapped demon onto the internet, and as a malevolent ghost in the machine, Moloch the demon poses as Malcolm, a nice boy that Willow meets in an online chat room and quickly falls for.
He's so smart, Buffy, and he's romantic, and we agree about everything.
Oh, what's he look like?
I don't know.
For the kids in the audience, this is when the idea of meeting someone online was very strange indeed, not the standard that it is today.
I met him online.
Online for what?
Buffy and Xander are wigged out and try to investigate this Malcolm, only to be thwarted by the Nerd Brigade, who are being mind-controlled by Moloch.
Party.
Nice nerd boy Dave tries to fight this mind control, and his murder is staged as if he died by suicide.
Remember me. Love, Dave.
Everything comes to a head as it turns out Moloch has taken over the minds of scientists at a computer research lab where he's having them build him a new body.
Everything flows through me. I know the secrets of your kings.
He reveals his true nature to Willow, who understandably isn't down with the whole mind control and murder thing, and, as per tradition, Buffy gets to punch this problem in the face. I love every part of this strange and ridiculous piece of television, from the corny fantasy sci-fi mix to the on-the-nose commentary on online stranger danger. On the surface, it's silly, it's goofy, it's fun, and under the surface is a genuine core to the story that lets you get something out of it, even now, nearly 30 years later. Willow's nerdy peers are mind-controlled by Moloch in a way that now feels very incel-coded. The more jacked in they are, the more susceptible they are to Moloch's manipulation. What is that if not an early metaphor for online radicalization?
I can give you everything. All I want is your love.
And in a time when people are so desperate to escape algorithmic manipulation that they pick up old dumb phones and MP3 players, tell me that this speech by Giles doesn't resonate with you on some level.
Honestly, what is it about them that bothers you so much?
The smell.
Computers don't smell, Rupert.
I know. Books smell. Musty and rich. The knowledge gained from a computer is it has no texture, no context. It's there and then it's gone. If it's to last, then the getting of knowledge should be tangible. It should be smelly.
And there are the two great appeals of Buffy Season 1. The surface silliness combined with the deeper, genuine core. Sure, maybe they were going for something a bit more serious. We're probably supposed to be thrilled by this fight, not laughing at it. And if you don't see the appeal of I, Robot, You, Jane, I understand why Season 1 might be a bore. But if you enjoy the corny camp, the outright Garth Marenghi style silliness, then Buffy Season 1 is a high, not a low.
Everybody, stay where you are. FBI, nobody move!
I have a few concessions to make before we wrap this up, starting with The Master. Let's be honest, there's no comparing The Master to Spike, or Glory, or even Adam. The Master is a completely impotent antagonist who's trapped underground for the whole season and never really does anything.
Soon you'll be free.
Soon you shall rise.
Almost free. No!
He exists as an idea of a looming greater threat, which is fine, but it's never going to be as interesting as an active antagonist who engages with the world. Even in the final fight, he can only beat Buffy through some sort of mind control bullshit that I don't even think we knew he could do. And then, once Buffy's back from the dead, she handily dispatches him in the epitome of underwhelming fight scenes. The Master's one claim to fame is acquiring his The Anointed One, but again, that feels more like an idea than a well-executed concept. It's the trope of the haunted, creepy child, except all we get is an awkward-looking kid doing an impression of an emotionless vampire.
We kill them all.
They hype up his great purpose, but all he ever does is show Buffy where to go in the finale, clearly a function that any underling could have performed. To be fair, the writers fully realised this misstep, and the Anointed One finally fills a function in early season 2 when Spike promptly murders him, and we all go, whoa, this guy's way cooler than the Master, he's actually gonna do stuff.
We're gonna have a little less ritual and a little more fun around here.
I don't want you to think I'm blind to the imperfections of the season, but rather I think that those imperfections have, with time, become part of its charm. The swish-swoosh sound effects set to mediocre acrobatics. The overly dramatic saccharine score. The low-key lighting used to hide all the things they couldn't afford. If you look at the vampire dusting effect and compare it to later seasons, you'll understand why they made the most of what they had, like crossfades. Doesn't it make you feel all cozy and nostalgic? I know I'm biased because I actually did watch the show when it first came out, and Teacher's Pet did scare me so much I had to step away from the show for a number of episodes. But I enjoy season 1 way more now than I did 10 or 20 years ago, probably because you can't see how wonderfully of its time a work of art is when you are also of that time. So, you've heard my arguments. Firstly, a lot of what you like about Buffy was there from the get-go, more than you'd expect. Secondly, later seasons did add more complexity, but they couldn't have done so without the solid foundation that season 1 lays down. And season 1 shouldn't have tried to complicate things from the get-go, because that's how you get many of the convoluted TV shows of today.
Please tell me you know what's happening.
Oh, she's gone. Is there something down here? This is a game we play where she throws things under the couch and then I have to get them for her. Isn't that right? There's still stuff in there. And finally, there are ways that the season is bad, but those constitute a particular kind of cheese that has only matured over time. It's enjoyable to me in the same way that a corny 80s movie is enjoyable. The technical faults have a charm that elevate the viewing experience. Later seasons may have higher production values, but they also have less of that cheese, less of that it's barely holding together charm, and I enjoy both those things in different ways, meaning that they balance each other out and allow this technically inferior season to reach the same high levels. I do have one last caveat. None of what I said is true if you watch the HD remaster, which tragically crops away half of the screen and fails to apply any of the same color correction, meaning that the moody dark atmosphere is completely swept away. Please find the 4x3 DVD version and thank me later. And, as a message to my past self, please remember that it's only 12 episodes. You can't call that a slog. They're 45 minutes each. That's like half a season of Westworld. You should watch it, and don't skip any episodes. Not even the puppet one. What do you think, Speaks? She says season 3 is the best one. Fair enough.